Hello, this is Chris Cooper. A big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. We're great to be back with you again for yet another week. I have another fantastic guest for you today. We've got Michael Macy. We're going to be talking about acting for peace and how to build it in our work and our communities. Because peace is something, it's not passive, it's not abstract, it's something that's not reserved for governments, diplomats, or global leaders. It's something that is important for all of us. And we're going to really explore this today, and I think no doubt have a fascinating conversation. I'd also just like to say before I go into this conversation that a couple of weeks ago, or last week, we had Laura from Hawaii, and she was. We talked there about really engaging with people around areas like feedback. She had done a huge amount of work in hospitality sector across Hawaii, working with major hotel chains and groups. But check out that interview if you're interested in topics such as how do you give incredible feedback and how do you keep energy high within organizations. So let's go back to peace just for a moment. Take a little breath. In this conversation, we're joined by Michael Macy, and he's a former US diplomat. He's an intercultural communication specialist. He's also a long-term student of Sufism. He's the co-founder. Excuse me, I'm struggling to find my words this afternoon. Of Enacting Peace. And he draws on nearly 30 years in the Foreign Service. He's got experience which spans not just the United Kingdom. He lives in Greenwich, near just outside London at the moment, or probably counted within London. But he's from the US originally. He's been to worked in Afghanistan, Haiti, Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia. And what he really cares about is peace building, and he's become a real expert in this field. Because peace is this invisible foundation upon which business, communities, and our lives every day really depend. And today there's just so much conflict that we hear about in the world, and violence, a lot of polarisation, a lot of fear. It's very much the narrative in the media today and in places around the world. But yet, I also, through these interviews, if you listen in regularly to the show, and we're episode 631 now, so we've done a few of these. We talk to people who are doing good around the globe in so many ways, and are bringing lots of peace and emotional intelligence and kindness. So we mustn't forget that actually the world is not a complete mess, as some people think at the moment. There's actually a lot of good going on, a lot of people doing that. So we're going to talk today about, it's not a political conversation today, it's really a human one, because peace doesn't simply happen, it's enacted by each of us. So I'd like to say a very big welcome to my guest, Michael Macy, and a big welcome to the show, Michael.
Chris, thanks very much. I'm honored to be here. This is a great experience.
No, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I think it must have been a long week this week. I had a few late nights, so I've noticed myself tripping over my words today. I want to say a big thank you actually to our good friend Sandy, who introduced us, Sandy Sedgefield, and she does some incredible work, and we go back quite a long way. But thank you to Sandy for the introduction to Michael. So, Michael, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your background? I know you grew up in Wisconsin, and I wonder if with you, was there like an early experience which really got you aware of the importance of peace?
Well, I think I was raised Catholic, and certainly at a time when the church was very active, and that to me was one of the principal messages. This is a teaching of peace and of kindness. And so I think that laid a pretty solid foundation. And then, of course, I came of age at a time when peace was certainly one of the focuses of our generation. Certainly of mine. I was active as a young student in anti-war movements. And then I realized through one of my mentors that really what was required wasn't more conflict. It was really a cultural shift. And then then I had to learn what is culture? What does all that mean? What does that involve?
Yeah.
So
So you're very much around in that kind of that sort of peace and love movement, were you? And
absolutely, I was. I
yeah,
still like to think I am. I don't think I've ever. You know, I don't look the same, but I think those foundations are run pretty deep.
yeah, it must have been quite an amazing time to be around actually, and enjoying your youth really. A lot of people coming together to into community to protest and a lot of
Well, I think, yeah, in fact, I encourage young people to consider doing things in different ways. I mean, we were blessed. We were given a lot of opportunities, and there was a tremendous openness to different ways of doing things, even different ways of. I mean, I was looking at a photograph the other day of the first house I was involved in buying, and it was this absolute wreck in the middle of 20 acres of burnt out sheep pasture with no plumbing and no heating but we set up a little charitable organization and we all owned it in common. And I have friends of mine who still live there who've done amazing things from that place. Um, so I encourage young people to really explore what alternatives there are. I mean, I always say, go on pilgrimage and take on a quest. Like,
so
and
where
there's
did
a
that
difference.
where did that
Yeah.
come from with you though? I mean, it seems like you describe yourself as a pilgrim. You had travelled extensively and you moved from place to place. You didn't do things sort of conventionally and necessarily, did you?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I worked for the State Department, and in many ways, I was a bureaucrat. I just got sent around a lot of places, and I've worked conventional jobs. But I think I think a couple of things were influential. One, my father had been a merchant seaman before he settled down to raise a family, and he told wonderful stories about the places he had visited, and they were always enchanting. The people always sounded kind, and the world was a safe but exciting place. That was the picture that he drew, and that I think really ignited my curiosity. That, oh wow, there's this great world out there, and one can go out and explore it. And it took me a while to expand the boundaries because I spent a lot of time wandering around North America because that fascinated me. But my experience has been it is a safe place. Most of the world is at peace. It's the
Yes.
natural state. And we just to quote Roosevelt, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That's the biggest inhibitor. That's what stops us from being who we are, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Uh, so if bearing in mind the kind of the headlines that we have at the moment, and it, it it continues. We get information very quickly, don't we? We're just hearing today about ructions between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we have issues in Europe with Russia and Ukraine, and we're people fear the impacts over here of Donald Trump actually. So I'm getting a little bit political here, but we hear a lot about separation and about there's a lot of anxiety. So you talk about the world. Actually, most of the world actually is at peace. And how do you sort of package what's really happening to people? How do you really view it right now? What's really happening in the world?
Well, I think first of all, people have realized that fear and anger are great motivators.
Yeah, they do.
And so they use those to develop support, to get votes, scare people, um, get them angry, get them worked up. And I think social media, we still haven't learned how to adapt to that. We haven't learned how to filter it. One of the things I encourage people to do is pay attention to what's going on locally.
Hmm.
Yes, there's violence between Afghanistan and Pakistan. How does that affect me? in my life right now, today, on Alderburgh Street in Greenwich? How are my neighbors doing? What do they need? Where's the potential conflict in this neighborhood?
Mm.
I'm always reminded of that by my wife, who has set up an amazing neighborhood network for just these three streets that we live on, that are in a sense isolated. But so I think we all have to learn how to filter, because there's no end of information, but we need to learn how to filter it. What do we need to know? And how much of that information is actually valuable? And we have to, I think, learn to differentiate between experience and information.
Yeah.
So I think that, I really stay local to a great extent.
Yeah. That's good. That's good advice. I think it's good advice, and I completely agree with you. And I think we have to be very careful to not allow this feed of information, and you say people stirring up people for votes, that it doesn't impact our psyche and our subconscious, and our mental health. Because actually, you're right. If you look locally, you'll see a lot of peace and harmony, and a lot of collaboration and connection. Now, in your younger years, you travelled a huge amount, and you travelled with someone that you described as a holy fool. I know he's kind of an important character in your life. What did you learn from him when it comes to, living a good life and doing so peacefully?
Well, I think he was an exceptional character, and he certainly had a very spiritual foundation. He'd been a Jesuit, and he had studied deeply and engaged with the traditions of indigenous Americans, particularly with the Sioux Nation, and had been on a vision quest with them. But he was unattached to stuff. As a fool, and surprisingly, he made a good living, and he gave most of it away, owned very little, had kept a room in a community house in Milwaukee, but he was rarely there. He used to say, I never spend any more than 2 weeks in any one place, and constantly put himself at the mercy of strangers. He would get these jobs. For example, he was to participate in a seminar on the tradition of mysticism in the desert in Arizona, and had to travel from a couple thousand miles. And he just cashed in the plane ticket and hitchhiked, which is what he always did. And he never missed a job. And you're constantly putting yourself, you're constantly asking. And I think it's very difficult to ask. We always want to negotiate. And when you're out there traveling in that way, you're asking. You have nothing to give but maybe a story to pay for the ride.
Yeah.
But you ask, and it's you have to accept your vulnerability. I always invite people, young people particularly, just go house to house someday and just ask for the ingredients for a meal. Ask for a potato at one door. Ask for maybe a can of soup at the next door. And at the end of it, and do this as a group, and then all come together and cook what you have together as a meal, and be grateful to all the strangers who provided you with that food.
Yeah.
We're always being provided by food by strangers. I don't raise cows in my backyard,
I remember my oldest son coming to me one day. He'd been binge watching a program called The Kindness Diaries, and it was a gentleman called Leon Logothetis, and he was traveling. He did 2 trips. He did one across India on a motorbike with a sidecar, and he lived off the kindness of strangers. So he would ask them to fill his bike up with fuel, but also give him accommodation and food. What they didn't know was that he actually had some wealth and connections, and if some people were particularly kind, he might transform their orphanage, or he might give them, buy them a tuk-tuk or something like that. So it was a wonderfully inspiring program, and I then, when my son mentioned these programs, he was inspired by them. I binge watched them, and I contacted him, and 3 weeks later, I've got a photograph of my son talking to him in California on the phone, and I interviewed him on the show. But it was really interesting, that traveling like that nomadically, and how people were prepared to offer, often when they had nothing really.
Yeah, I used to say no one when I used to hitchhike, no one ever picked me up in a Rolls Royce.
So
Often they picked me up in they were barely getting by, but they'd
yeah,
stop, you
yeah.
know. Um, yeah.
And so when you worked in places like Afghanistan, and you went to Northern Ireland as well, and Haiti, so you must have seen some pretty challenging sort of situations. What did you learn about peace from those visits? And did you ever have situations where you saw peace starting to happen where maybe there'd been conflict?
Yeah, I think well, Afghanistan, I got there in shortly after I got there in 2004, and you could see the effect of war. It was all around, and it was dramatic. But what was more inspiring, I mean, that was a lesson, but what was really as inspiring is I was involved in the Good Friday Agreement.
Were you?
I always say I'm not sure that I contributed much, but I had a front row seat. And what was amazing is there was this shift that made it possible. When I first got involved in Belfast, people would say, "Oh, it's never going to happen." That conflict was centuries old, and it really was. And no one could imagine there being peace. And then there was a lot of hard work. There was a tremendous amount of sacrifice that was made. But it really took a shift in perception. And you could almost see it happen. You could feel it happen where people said, wait a minute. It was like waking up from a bad dream going, we don't have to do this. We do not have to kill each other. And we're not going to do it. And we're not going to support those people who do. And I was just back in Northern Ireland a year or so ago, and it's just the place is transformed.
Yeah.
Now, the other lesson, there are many, but the other lesson in that is peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the absence of violence. The conflict is still there. They're still painting the walls, they're
Yep.
still doing their thing. The conflict exists. No one's been killed for 25 years.
Hmm.
And that opens up the space to begin to resolve the conflict. I mean, one of the women I interviewed for a video we're working on, she's Protestant. She teaches Gaelic. She said, if I had attempted to do this 25 years ago, I'd be dead. And you see that space that's been created. And if you wait for the end of the conflict, you're not going to have peace. You just end the violence. And that gives me incredible hope because I've seen it happen. I've seen it shift. And it wasn't, yeah, there were some heroic figures that were involved in negotiating that agreement, but it really was the people on the street going about their daily lives who said, we're not doing this anymore.
Hmm.
It was transformational to me, but also to a whole community.
And as a US diplomat, what did your work entail?
Well, I did what's called cultural diplomacy or public diplomacy. I didn't do government to government. It was people to people. So I promoted academic exchanges. I produced musical performances and theatrical performances and poetry readings and stand-up comics. Humor is a great tool, particularly when we were countering extremists, because most extremists don't have a sense of humor. You can go a long way pushing against extremist views just by laughing at yourself, laughing at the situation. So that was my work. I mean, I was cultural attaché here in London and in Riyadh and in India and Tunisia a lot, but that was really my focus, was public affairs, was reaching out to the people in whatever country I was assigned. And I loved it. I mean, they would send me to a country and say, okay, now you have to go out and meet the artists and the musicians and the leading academics and the journalists. Well, they're always the most interesting people in any
Yeah.
country, by far. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I'm not particularly creative, but I got to meet and work with amazing people.
Amazing. Have you got a standout moment that sticks in your
Oh,
mind?
I've got a lot of them. One of them that, I mean, again, the one that just popped into my mind is I was on a boat one night going up the Niger River in Mali, and we pulled over to this village, and there was this big guy with a white goat and a crowd of people, and he got on, and it was the musician Ali Fakar Toure, who I got to know. And his band they plugged in and they started playing, and it was this amazing music. And he brought the goat or the sheep just to donate to the next dinner. And I said, Ali, you're playing the blues. He goes, Michael, I only play traditional Malian music. Where do you think the blues come from? And it sort of opened up this
Yeah.
whole understanding to me of how much of American culture, I don't mean African American culture, American culture, the culture that all of us participate in, comes from Africa. And it was a great gift that Ali gave me, because then I started paying attention and saw all of these influences which run deep and we need to celebrate. And again, it was this opening up of a door. And I've had so many of those moments where I'll tell you one more short story, but I went to buy ice in Malta once for a party, and I bought the drinks. So I went to where I bought the drinks to buy the ice, and they said, "Well, we don't sell ice." So I walked across the street to the grocery store, and I said, "I want to buy ice." And they go, "Well, we don't sell ice." I said, "Okay, I give up. Where do I buy ice?" They said, "Oh, the truck rental place." And I realized in that moment that I was never going to know where I was. Most of these countries I'd go on, I couldn't read the street signs.
Hmm.
And it was a great liberating moment for me to realize I was never going to know where I was. And then I could relax. I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to create this illusion like, oh, I know where I am and I can, I'm in control of my situation.
Yeah.
I was never in control of my situation. I couldn't even know, I didn't even know where to buy ice, for heaven's sakes, you know? So yeah, that there are a lot of those moments that constantly reminded me of that.
And is that an interesting that's an interesting sort of frame of mind, that the mindset that maybe you're not in control and it's okay. So then you can just maybe be in the moment without all the stress and the fear.
Yeah, what it does is it every day is a school day,
Yeah.
because I don't know what's going on, but I can learn every day. I can learn a little bit more, on a good day. Um, and that's exciting because there's no end to what we can learn, and there are those moments of, I think, in everyone's life of understanding, and it's not intellectual, and it's not emotional, but it's deep, and we're all given those moments, and see, but you're never there. It's like, it's like, oh, I got it. Oh, now I understand. I'm always a little bit leery of people who tell me they understand it.
Yeah, yeah. But what is interesting with your background, having been to so many different places and traveled and had so many different experiences, is your perception of the world, which might be very different to people who've maybe lived in a local area and watched the news. When you've been there and you've experienced it, and engaged with different people. And I mean, I guess what you're trying, what is coming up for me is actually the importance of allowing yourself to have some adventure in your life, and to see and experience.
Yeah, I think though that's open to everybody. I mean, I one of the sort of taglines that I've loved from a song is just relaxing and paying attention. I mean, that's sort of what I've attempted to do. And I remember reading about a musician. He goes under the name Bon Iver, and I can't remember his. It'll come to me, but he's from Wisconsin too, and he lives in this little town. It's not a village, a town of Eau Claire. And someone said, "Well, what, don't you want to go to Nashville, or don't you want to go to Los Angeles?" And he said, "No, I want to know every square inch of this town." So he built a recording studio, and now the world goes to him to record.
Ah,
But I have a great respect for friends of mine too, who have traveled very little, but they've paid attention.
yes.
They again, one of the couples who I mentioned earlier on, that I had lived in this little intentional community, and they're still there 51 years later on the same piece of property, and they've transformed the place. And along the way, Mark participated in the creation of what for years was the world's largest sustainable energy fair in this little town. And the world would come to them. And it still exists. It's just not the world's largest, but for years. And Ellen built an amazing children's bookstore that was magical. And so again, it's not, you don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah.
There's, that
Yeah.
there's a Sufi story of someone who's told, I'll paraphrase it, but he's told there's this treasure that's hidden. And so he travels the world and finally realizes that the treasure is, buried in his own home.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't, for me, I needed to travel. That's in my blood. It's what I do. And I realized early on in life too, that wasn't a phase I was going to grow out of, that I just had to figure out a way to be able to do it, because that was mine to do. Other people, it's theirs not to travel at all. And that's okay too. I think part of it was giving myself permission just to be, as one of my teachers said, if we would just be who we would be if we could be who we really are.
Mm.
And it's different for everybody.
Yeah, that's interesting. You got me thinking, because I've like you, I've not travelled probably quite to the extent you have, but I've travelled a lot over the years, and I'm not right at this point in time. Last few months, I've not really travelled anywhere, but I've actually been really enjoying the experience of getting absorbed in music. Because I play the guitar, and
Oh, wow.
I think I've learnt over 20 songs since December, different songs. And I've actually been really enjoying, how those songs are constructed, and being able to play them. And so I've been on a journey which has included blues and other forms of music, and had some auditions for things, and but actually that has expanded my mind. I've traveled through the learning in some ways.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. It's just I think it was Joseph Campbell who said follow your bliss. And I'd heard that years ago without really understanding it. And I think now I'm always careful about saying I understand. But to me, at this moment, what it means is know what gives you joy, and not just pleasure. I mean, joy is much deeper.
Mm.
And I think it's a good exercise if you're wondering what's mine to do, is sit down with a piece of paper and write down the 10 things you most enjoy, but be honest, you know, and then figure out a way to get somebody to pay you to do it. That's kind of been my practice. Um, and it changes. So then I got to figure out somebody to pay me to do something different.
Yeah, excellent. Finding your ikigai.
Yeah.
So, well, it's been brilliant having the lovely kind of rambling conversation. I've really enjoyed it, because I think there's all sorts of little ideas and thoughts that are coming to me through this conversation around experience and traveling and peace. So after the break, we'll get more into peace itself, and have a look at some of the mindsets that are needed, so that we can maybe in our organisations or within the communities where we're working, we can maybe identify when it's not as present as we might like it to be, and some of the strategies and methodologies and tools to really resolve it, and move us out of a pace of real conflict is important. We'll talk about that too, but in a place that is allowing positive change and the kind of results that we want to see. So we'll have a look at that after the break, and we'll have a little talk about Sufism as well, so that people get to understand, because there's an aspect to you we haven't really talked about yet. So we're back again in just a couple of minutes. Do join us after the break. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with Michael Macy, and we've had a lovely kind of exploration of some of Michael's journey and some of his stories before the break, and experiences as a US diplomat. And tell us a little bit. Actually, tell us a little bit just today. What you do right now, because you actually formed an organisation or co-founded one about enacting peace, didn't you? So, what's the intention behind that? And
Yeah, enacting peace, it's a very simple idea. We invite people to act for peace, consciously do something 4 times a year on the equinoxes and the solstices. We don't want to ask too much. And those are good markers because they're these astronomical influences are undeniable. I mean, I live close to the Thames, and I see the effect of the moon every day.
yeah,
Those tides are incredibly dramatic. And I used to spend some time on the river, and you ignore the tidal schedules at your peril. So we picked the equinoxes and the solstices, and we want people to act for peace, in that we believe that peace really is the result of all of our actions and intentions, that it's not just dependent on politicians or influencers, or that we create peace. And we do that through our actions. And most of us expect peace. We get up in the morning, we go out, and we expect that when we return, our family, our loved ones, our home is going to be there. And that's predicated on peace. It's not true for everybody in the world, but it can be. Also, we're at a point and I believe in human consciousness, that the human experience is now common enough where we can resolve differences without war.
yeah,
That's not always been true. The person I learned this from had been very active in World War II, and he said World War II is necessary, but we've gone beyond that. And again, social media, one of the great benefits is it really has made the human experience much more common, particularly among young people. So now, how do we make peace? But also, if there is another great world war, it will probably be, the end of us as a species. The world will continue. We just won't have human beings. I'm kind of fond of us. So, but that's balance. That's the way it works. You can't have this tremendous potential without an equal downside. So how do we get there? And I think it's every one of us celebrating peace, acknowledging it, and then acting to create, to build peace. And it could be as simple as lighting a candle, putting it in a window. It could be organizing a concert for 100,000 people.
mm,
when we started this, I called one of my mentors, who's a rabbi here in London. I can't talk about him without laughing because the man just personifies joy. And I called him up. I said, "What should we do? We want to do this. We want to do this, create this way for people to build peace." And he said, "Just ask people to do a kind favor for a friend." Could be that simple, but that does it. It shifts things, and it
Mm,
shifts things as we do it. We shift it by giving. It changes us. Another lesson from one of my teachers. He talks about being in San Francisco years ago, and he was walking down the street with quite an amazing guy I knew, and they're panhandlers, and they may be on drugs. They could be drinking, and he said, "I don't know who to give money to. What if I give money and they go out and they buy a drink, or they get stoned or whatever?" And so he turned to Joe and he said, "Joe, what do you do?" And Joe goes, "I don't decide. I just give to everybody.
yeah.
It's not up to me to decide what they do with it. My responsibility is to give." That's not always easy, but I think that's the lesson. So in what we in Enacting Peace do is invite people to consciously act for peace, celebrate peace, and then let us know about it so that we can share it. We ask people, what does peace look like to you? I was struck the other day. I was in the airport, and I saw all these people moving around and greeting each other, and they were excited often because they're going on a trip as a family, or someone's going to a business meeting that they hope is going to produce good results. And I'm thinking, this is what peace looks like. These people have a reasonable expectation. They're going to get on a plane. They're going to get where they want to go, and they're going to be safe doing it. That's what peace looks like. So we invite people, tell us what peace looks like. Sing a song, send us a picture, send us recipes. What does peace taste like? We provide recipes. When you think about it, what does peace taste like to you? Share that recipe with us. What does peace sound like? I mean,
Mm,
I don't know if you know who Peggy Seeger is. Um, but she's quite an amazing singer, songwriter. She's Pete Seeger's sister, if that means anything. But
yeah.
she's touring right now, and she's 90.
Wow.
She just released a new album, and on that is a song called "How I Long for Peace." Well, it's a beautiful evocation of the importance of peace, and she kindly let us use her song for one of our Enacting Pieces online events. So that's Enacting Peace. Act. Don't just think about it. Celebrate it.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Very interesting. So so peace can be different things to different people.
Oh yeah.
It's not an absence. You talked at the beginning. We talked about an absence of violence, but actually here we're talking about often acts of kindness.
Well, how do you create peace?
Hmm.
How do you make peace? It's not passive. Peace is a result of action. I mean, one of the inspirations for this is I was in Greenwich, and I was at a friend's birthday party in a restaurant, and it overlooked the river, and I was sitting so I could see out the window across the Canary Wharf. And I thought, 80 years ago, that was an absolute ruin, one of the most heavily bombed places in Britain. And now look at Canary Wharf. That's peace.
Yes.
That's what peace looks like. And so there are many results of peace, and that's what we need to celebrate. Is what does peace give us? It allows us to raise our families. It allows us to create. Every building is a result of peace. Every tree continues to live because of peace. When I think, what does peace look like to me? There's an amazing Mediterranean oak in Greenwich Park, and I often walk by that tree and just go, whoa, that's a couple hundred years of peace for
Hmm.
that tree to grow.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's enacting peace.
So peace allows things to flourish.
It's the predicate. Without it, I mean, I've seen the destruction of war. I'm not a veteran. I've seen the aftermath. It's ugly, and it does no one any good. It serves no purpose.
Yeah. So when when you think of maybe organizations, for example, um, is is the output of peace an organization that flourishes, and
Yeah.
an absence of peace one which is diminishing?
Well, yeah, I think you can look around and see the wasted opportunities. When you think of Russia and Ukraine, and Russia has unimaginable resources. They could be feeding the world.
Hmm.
And what are they doing? And it's because, again, I'm hesitant to say I understand, but part of it is inherited trauma. Um, One of the Sufi teachers wrote, the first step to forgiveness is forgetfulness. A lot of the times we just have to forget. We carry too many of these stories on and on and on. I want peace memorials. I don't want any more. I know this will get me in deep trouble. I'm not a big fan of Remembrance Day. I want people to remember peace. I want them to sit down once a day, once a year, 4 times a year, and go, oh, I remember that day. It was so peaceful. Maybe it was the day a child was born, or it was whatever it was, that a company had reached a milestone. I mean, celebrate peace. That's what provides us the opportunity to create
Hmm.
and to grow. And every business, almost without exception, exists because of peace and the opportunity that peace creates. That's why our message from Enacting Peace, we invite organizations to participate and through them reach their colleagues, the people that they work with, the community that they operate within. We want to reach out to companies. Peace is not it's not just the responsibility of spiritual organizations or non-governmental actors. It's all of us. It's every company relies on peace to be able to thrive.
Hmm.
And so our invitation, we've got the Sainsbury's Art Center in Norwich. They signed on. They're an art center. They're not a religious or spiritual organization. No, there is that aspect to it, of course. But do you know what I mean? And we're gonna beginning to reach out to companies and say, you know, encourage your employees. And again, that you mentioned earlier that peace is not the absence of conflict, but it sets parameters for peace to be maintained. It can't be violence, and violence can take a lot of forms. And I would posit that for a successful company knows how to use the conflict that's inevitable in any environment to really achieve the company's objectives. And in most companies, it's to make a profit. Well, I've seen this. The companies that brought conflict out into the open, that acknowledged it, that got people to share their fears, their concerns, their aspirations, made for a much more effective and profitable company. In that, people were able to identify what do they want from this situation? And maybe this situation can't provide it.
Yeah.
So you encourage them to find another place that will actually allow them to achieve their dreams.
Yeah.
And the ones where there is a match, it releases tremendous energy.
Hmm. It's funny. I was working with one of my a company I've worked with for a number of years, and they went through a terrible situation with the board. Got into conflict last year, and I had to get really wade in there and really think carefully how to manage that conflict and lead them out. And I just spoke to one of the directors this morning, and he said we've had the most incredible week. It's been absolutely amazing. With amazing sales coming in, people are happy. We've just won an award. It's been absolutely unbelievable. And but they had to go through that conflict and bring it out into the open. and deal with it, and then we
Yeah.
can move on at a higher, a higher level, really, to make that level shift. So
Otherwise, you get caught up in it. You get bogged down. And that's what I meant when I referred to earlier, this kind of inherited trauma. If you're constantly focused, when you look at those movements that I would say are life denying, they all look back to a golden age. Whether it's Trump's America that wants it to be eternally 1970 or 1952. I mean, it's always, or it's Islamic fundamentalists. They always want it to be this golden age of 700 AD or whatever, but they're all nonsense periods. You can pick a kind of one of those populist movements, and they always want to go back. It's always again. No, there's no again. The only people condemned to repeat history are historians. Nothing ever happens the same way twice, ever. It's impossible.
mm,
And as long as we're longing for the old days, we're condemned to be disappointed. So I like to remind people, and in a lot of those old days, there was no antibiotics. That was no gift. You cut yourself, you died. You ran the risk. I mean, it's just, let's be realistic about how good they were. And we don't know how good or bad they were anyway. At this point, we have probably the least amount of poverty worldwide in the known history of the human race. I didn't make that up. I mean, that's from, I think, um, from the book Human Kindness, or it's from, anyway,
yeah,
I didn't make it up. But yeah,
yeah,
so I think there are so many things that are available to us that we now take for granted. Yeah, be careful about what you wish for. I'm not really sure I want to go back to some of those earlier supposed golden ages.
mm. So how do we, so that we, it feels to me to be able to bring more peace into the world, we have to also consider our own inner peace. And you mentioned there about stories that can definitely play a role, can't they? People sit with stories and they're reflecting back all the time, and it impacts their kind of inner level of balance. What's your advice to people, and also having been somebody who's studied Sufism, perhaps, what's your advice to ensure that you can show up in a peaceful way, such that you're then conducive with helping contribute to more peace?
Yeah, I don't claim to be particularly peaceful, though I work at it. And I think we have to be careful about, I mean, if we waited until we were saints and entirely at peace, none of us would ever act.
No.
I'm moved. Recently, I read a quote from Chesterton, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, children in their innocence pray for justice. Those of us who are older and more experienced pray for mercy. We don't want justice. I don't want to be held responsible for the things I've done. I
Yeah.
want mercy.
Yes.
And so I think for me, the way to develop that inner peace is to constantly, though I don't achieve this, not even close, remind myself to be kind, to give, to be. And I think that takes me out of myself. And it ends, we all live with these stories that we've come to love, and none of them are accurate, but we get really attached to our own stories. And the way out of it is to give it up, but it's hard because we identify with those stories. And what's the purpose of history? I asked my brother once, who's a historian and a theologian, a medievalist, and I said, what's the purpose of history? He goes, the only value it has is, does it inspire?
Hmm.
Is it inspiring? Does it teach? And again, Sufis use stories a lot to teach, but it's not to evoke some, I don't know if there ever was a golden age of Sufism, but yeah, it's use the stories, use them well. And stories have a tremendous amount of power, but not nostalgia. I think supposedly Bob Dylan said nostalgia is death. I've never been able to find the quote, but I like it. And I like to attribute it to Bob Dylan because I like the quote. But yeah, I think nostalgia is death.
Yeah.
So the only way I know is just act on kindness. And that does take you out of yourself.
Yes.
It takes me out of myself. I can't. There are a lot of ways, that seems to work for me.
Yeah. So how do you best, so if you're leading an organization, you're leading people, you act with kindness, but how do you best lean into situations where that aren't resulting in peace?
Well, I
So
think yeah, go ahead.
you know, so some people, for example, are able to, through their energy and their kindness, are able to attract people in, but sometimes they might have qualities that actually also repel. For example.
Yeah, I think if you create an atmosphere where people are encouraged to participate, a lot of it is listening more than than talking. If you allow people the opportunity to contribute to and that's the gift, is to be able to moderate that, but to be able to listen and to create opportunities for people really to contribute. You'll also find the solutions to the problems from among the people who are there and in the midst of it. That's not a new idea, but I think when you have a conflict in a work situation, particularly, it's inevitably going to inhibit growth. It's going to inhibit achieving goals. So you have to get it. And you, Chris, you had said this earlier, as you would advise this company, get it out, bring the people together who have the issue, and give them the space to find a way to discuss it, because often people aren't able to. They're aware of the conflict, but they may not even, it may not be top of mind. They may not initially have the ability to articulate it. So you got to give them a bit of time and a bit of space, always keeping an eye on what's the objective. What are we here for?
Yeah.
It's a different management style, but I've seen it. And again, provide people the opportunity to celebrate, provide experiences for people where they get to know each other beyond the professional veneer. I mean, used to work for a marketing company, and the owner was great. Whenever we lost a big account, he'd throw a party. He'd book a restaurant for the whole afternoon, pay for anything anybody wanted, and it would just reset everything.
That's great. Mm.
And he also, in that office, everybody's birthday was a big deal, a big deal. And so you knew when people's birthdays were, and you knew something about them, and you knew about some of the pain in their
Yeah.
lives. And that provided, no one ever wanted to leave that place. And they were successful.
Yeah.
People still, who I'm still in touch with, people I worked there, and they still talk about it.
Brilliant. Do you have a final message you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, enact peace, consciously, at least 4 times a year, do something. And if you let us know, that's fine. And if you don't, that's not the important part. It is celebrate peace, act for peace, and be aware of it. Be grateful.
That's brilliant. Hey, I've really, really enjoyed the conversation today, and I think it's probably thrown up all sorts of ideas and thoughts. I like that idea of enacting peace. It being something that you can take the responsibility for in your life. Being acts of kindness and whatever that may be, that brings you kind of joy, and brings people together. That acts of celebration as well, really important. And remembering people's birthdays, making a different, making a fuss about it when it happens. And I think if you go through life like that, then you're going to be very appreciated, and you're going to make a bigger contribution, I think, if you can create that kind of environment. So, Michael, thank you so much for talking to us. I would recommend to people to go and check out enactingpeace.org, and why not join this movement to be somebody who every quarter at least does something kind. It's easy for me to remember one of them because I was born on the solstice.
Whoa!
So I can remember to do an act of kindness on that one quite easily. The summer solstice.
Oh, wow!
But I think that's a really, really noble thing to do. Small thing, we can all do that. Lighting a candle to think about peace, and 4 times a year, and in your window, and or just being kind to somebody, paying for something unexpectedly for people. I think there's imagine if we did this every week,
Wow!
or even every day.
It's
something.
It's transformational.
Yeah, it is. So check out enactingpeace.org, and once again, a big thank you to Michael Macy for joining us today. Been brilliant talking to you, and thank you for inspiring us. Anybody's got any questions or comments, you can drop an email to me. If you have any feedback, or if you listen to this and you've enjoyed it and you can share it, do share it, because actually there's a message here, there's a ripple that we want to create around peace. If we can all have an impact, everybody can be doing something positive, then the world's going to be a better place, isn't it? It really is. And the experience is going to be a better one. And we're going to start to see even more of those beautiful environments you described, where, like in London, areas have once been bombed, like Canary Wharf, and now there's something spectacular and quite beautiful in its structure. In organisations, if an organisation is maybe starting to fade or is dying right now, maybe that's a consequence of an absence of peace. So how can you start bringing more peace to it, bringing those issues out in the open, and then moving it into something that can expand and flourish once more. So thank you once again, Michael. Do take care, and look forward to another show next week. And we'll shortly have, just to let you know, on the chriscooper.co.uk website, I've created a ebook which is 10 elevations for thriving and doing good today, and they're based upon insights from 630 shows, but also the community, the Elevation Collective that has been created to amplify more good in the world. So some of our members have contributed to that ebook. So it's going to be free. It'll be available in the next week or two from chriscooper.co.uk. So do check it out. And once again, Michael Macy, thank you so much for joining us today.